Welcome to On Culture. On this podcast, we talk about culture and faith and the world and our place in it. You can subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also support our work and explore all of our content on our website, theembassy.substack.com. Here's Mike.
All right, we're back. Welcome back to this next edition of On Culture. On Culture is the podcast of the Embassy Substack newsletter. My name is Mike Sherman, and I'm joined today by my good friend Kyle Bradley. Kyle is communication director at our church, and we've been good friends for a long time. He's a creative person. We're going to talk about creativity. Hello, Kyle. How you doing?
Hi, doing good. How are you?
Great, doing great.
Yeah.
So I want to tell the people that feel free to subscribe to the Embassy Substack newsletter, and you can find On Culture and subscribe to that wherever podcasts are sold. You have a Substack as well, because part of your creative output is poetry. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so you sort of introduced me to the Substack world. I knew nothing about it. But yeah, I write poetry, been writing kind of off and on for a very long time, but just in the past few years started writing quite a lot of poetry. And I've tried different ways of getting it out there, but this is my first kind of attempt to get people to subscribe to my stuff, to get a few poems out a month for those who are inclined to read them.
Yeah. So Lines I Write.
Yep. linesiwrite.substack.com.
Lines I Write, all one word, LINESIWRITE.substack.com.
Yep.
I am a subscriber. I enjoy Kyle's poetry. Kyle's got a book of poetry that I have and I've read. 2017, about a pivotal year in your life, and people can find that on Amazon, I think, right?
Yeah.
That's out there to be found.
Might be hard to find, but it's on there.
It's out there. After your Substack takes off, you won't be able to.
Who knows?
No, exactly. Okay, so I want to talk about, part of culture is, culture is many faceted. We'll talk about that, and we'll engage with that in the Embassy newsletter, all the different ways that culture impacts us that we don't think about. But one of the ways that seems obvious is we engage with other people's creative output. When you think of culture, you often think of books, stories, TV shows, movies, and so on. And for me, I am not artistically talented in the traditional sense. I think I'm a pretty good writer, but not in the sense that most people would call it that. Most people are thinking of authors of fiction books and such. So I've always had this interesting relationship or thoughts about the word creativity. Are you a creative person? And my experience with that is people are asking you whether you're artistically talented or not. Like, do you make art of some sort? And so what are your thoughts on that question and just creativity in general as we get started?
Well, if the motivation behind the question is, are you artistic, it feels a bit unfair. And I don't know, for a number of different reasons. I just believe creativity presents itself in all sorts of different ways. So yeah, you're probably right. Most of the time we think in the artistic realm, writing fiction, painting, sculpture, sort of the fine arts, but I think creativity presents itself in all sorts of areas. Problem solving. There's just a lot.
Yeah. And I think that's where some of my creativity comes into play, is in thinking of solutions, different ways to get around obstacles and so forth. Part of my training and experience as an engineer is really, that's a lot of that. Some engineers aren't super creative. They're very gifted, mathematicians perhaps, or even scientists, but that doesn't necessarily make them great engineers unless they can really apply some of that to solving problems. That's so your views on creativity and my views on creativity, I think, and if you state them out loud, and people will probably, I think, nod along and say, yeah, I think that's probably right. And we all
Mhm.
have some sense of being creative. I would question that interests me that we probably don't have a lot of time for is why not? Why do we don't just ask if people are artistically talented instead of, that's really what we mean?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. We don't ask those sorts of
I,
questions in our culture. It's a cultural, like we don't
yeah, I wonder
say,
why
yeah,
that is.
we don't say, are you
Does it
good at
feel
sports?
does it feel insulting?
I don't know. I mean, it's
If the
just not
answer is
something
no,
we
yeah,
do.
I don't know.
Yeah. Are you
Yeah.
good at sports? We don't ask that question. Did you, even did you do good in school? We ask, are you going to school? Do you play sports? Are you creative? We have all
Yeah.
these indirect ways of asking about
I
people.
wonder if it's an ego thing where if you say creative, it's sort of creativity sort of conceptual.
I think
So if
so.
you say you're creative, you're not necessarily defining it by like, yeah, I'm really great at painting.
Yeah, because
You could
people
just,
aren't going to want to answer
it's
that
sort
way.
of a
Yeah,
pass. Yeah.
yeah, right. Um, so anyway, it's an interesting, I guess, thought about. That's
Mhm.
that's a part of our culture in a way in which we interact with our culture. We don't really think about it, which is, I'm going to keep saying it as our newsletter and podcast, that is the normal state of affairs, that we interact with culture all the time in ways we don't think about. Um,
Mhm.
so one of the sources of reflection for this question is a book that we both read because we're in a book club together,
Mhm.
and there's actually a series, like a limited series on HBO called Station 11, and the series is not it's not exactly the same plot line, but they're both well done. But the setting, the context of Station 11, most of the story happens in a post-pandemic world, even though the book was written before our, most recent pandemic.
Yeah.
Pandemic wipes out most of the civilization, most people, and it follows along this group of people who are traveling around Michigan. That happens to be set like near Lake Michigan,
Mhm.
and performing Shakespeare. They go from
Yeah.
little village to little village and perform Macbeth or Hamlet or King Lear or
Yeah.
whatever.
In like a caravan of sorts, right?
Right. Like a caravan of sorts.
Yeah.
And, one of the, on one of the lead caravan, this is the Shakespeare Company, because survival is insufficient. That's the slogan,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so, what are your, you can use that as a springboard, or in that phrase, like what are they saying there? And what does that reflect about our own, the way we look at life, the way we look at beauty, the way we look at art, the way we look at culture? I don't know. What are some thoughts you have on that?
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, I love that quote. That's one of the main things that stuck with me from that story. Because I think it's so easy for me just to survive. And like, I don't, um, I think we'll talk about this probably at some point. There's a phrase in there about sleepwalking.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to just sort of coast through life and not think about the arts, not think about creativity. I know there are people who do that, but for me personally, it's just easy to coast. It's easy to sort of survive. It's easy to like get through this moment to get to the next moment to get to the next, and
Yeah.
and then I just find myself accomplishing or trying to accomplish or trying to get through one thing and then the next, and that to me just feels like surviving. And what poetry has allowed me to do is slow down and create just to create. That just
Mm-hmm.
getting from one thing to the next isn't
Right.
sufficient. So
Right.
that I relate to that a whole lot.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can relate to it, because as we are moving through our lives, like, this is the next thing I need to do in school. This is the next thing I need to do at my job. This is the next project around the house. This is the next kids
Mhm.
activity. This is, we've got to then sign the kids up for this next sport. And there's always this next thing that you can do,
Yeah.
and you can do it very well. And people can look at it and then
Mhm.
say, this is a high functioning person.
Mhm.
But one of the one of the parts of the story you referred to is, the story does a good job of going back and forth between the pre-pandemic and the post-pandemic world, and people reflecting on life before and life after. And one of the characters is reflecting back on this interview that he had, because he was like a corporate consultant or something. And he was interviewing this person who's talking about these sorts of people. And they basically, she calls them high functioning sleepwalkers, where she says another part of that same interchange, that they spend their whole lives waiting for their lives to begin, where they're basically just going to and she's talking about CEO sort of type people who are very successful. And I do think that if we measure our lives by all these different outward things, and it's very easy just to be caught up in that, and the way it might manifest for some people. I mean, for me, if you're reading a work of fiction, let's say, and you've got a bunch of things, as one always does, I have a list of things that need to get done, and I'm reading a work of fiction. Like, how do I even justify that? Well, because survival is insufficient, right? Like, I'm not necessarily writing poetry, but if I was reading, like, why am I doing that? It's because interaction with beauty, meaning, joy is, that's why we're doing all the things, really, that that we have to be on our list. And if we fail to do those things, we can get by, and we can survive, but then we will. That's not who we're made to be.
I think you just miss so much. There's just, like, you're talking about beauty. There's just so much beauty out there to be seen, and when you're efficiently sleepwalking, and I relate to that so much, you miss all of that. You miss beauty, you miss presence, you miss like a sort of intentionality that comes with like waking up and living, whether that is writing the poem or reading the poem or stopping to look at flowers.
That last one, it seems strange. You talked about a trip that you guys took to Scotland recently, and just this hike you took and how meaningful it was, right? And I was thinking of that, and it made me think of Nancy and I were in Utah in one of the national parks. We were we were by the Mesa Arch, in fact. But this Bryce Canyon happened all sorts of places where we're there with a bunch of other people at this place of just amazing beauty. And I would say half of the people are there to pose for a picture they can share. They're there so they can share a picture with their friends. Like, they're not even really experiencing the beauty, right? And some of them just...
It's so easy to do that.
Yeah.
That's almost like ingrained now, is what it feels like, is, I have to capture this moment rather than just experience
it. Right. Except be in the moment. Right. And so I do think that can be a lot of life. And I think so. I think that for people of Christians, often we can be serious, and we want to be, we don't want to be frivolous, and sometimes I think we miss something that God intends for us, and that I think that's true for all people. And I believe that one of the reasons survival is insufficient, even though I don't think the author of Station 11 is necessarily a religious person. I've heard her speak once or twice. I don't think that's where that was coming from. And the line originally comes from a Star Trek, episode, I think. Maybe not originally, but I think that's the first cultural interaction with it. And it's not coming from a faith point of view. But I believe we're made in the image of God, and part of the outcome of bearing the image of God, whatever our beliefs are, is survival is insufficient. That we're made to interact with beauty, meaning, and if we're not doing that, then there's some part of our humanity that's dormant, right?
It's hard to name exactly what that is, but I just think we are surrounded by a world that God created as beautiful. I mean, it's just everywhere, but so quickly we sort of lose imagination and lose creativity, and I think to some degree lose the enjoyment of those things, except maybe when we go on vacation, or we like create a significant amount of space to go do the thing rather than just try and recognize it in the daily because it's there.
Yeah, and I think it's a daily battle. I take our dog around the block every morning. One of the first things I do, and so that she can do her business, and I can pick it up in a bag instead of picking it up later from my backyard. But it's like, so one of the decisions I made a while back is I'm not going to listen to anything while I'm doing that. I'm not going to have headphones in.
Yeah.
It's not that long of a walk anyway. But even then, it's easy to think about all the stuff I've got to do. Right over here, the sunrise is coming up, and it's beautiful, and the sky is beautiful.
Right.
If I was on vacation, I would appreciate the sky, but it's the same sky,
Right.
obviously.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think it's like a choice that I need to make. It's almost a discipline in our culture. It's a discipline that we need to have, or else we'll just skip over it.
Yeah, I had, you and I've talked about this before, but I think what I would call time anxiety. I read that somewhere in like the last year that even earlier, as I was talking about, like a lot of my anxiety comes through, I'm worried about a thing that's coming. So I'm just anxious about it. And then when I get to the thing, I'm just anxious about the next thing. So it's very difficult for me to be present and enjoy those things unless I'm away in Scotland or I'm on a trip at the beach or something like that. And I remember, I think it was this past fall, I was raking leaves with my 4-year-old, and time anxiety would push me towards getting the leaves done as fast as I can so that I can get on to the next thing. And I'm playing with him basically. I mean, he's making it just drag the process. Like it's going from maybe a half an hour of raking leaves to like 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But what's beautiful is he's having the time of his life.
Yeah.
And he's jumping in the leaves. He wants me to pick him up and put him in the trash can full of leaves so he can like bury himself. And I had this realization where I said to myself, don't just get through this thing. And I have to like tell myself that often, like stop for a second, don't just get through it and enjoy whatever is happening right now. Cause I'm somebody like, I think sunsets are beautiful. My wife loves them, and every night she recognizes them and is like, hey, you should come look at this. And most of the time I'm just like, no, I'm good, which is really sad. Now I try to make an effort. I think you're right. I think it's sort of a discipline of like, no, it's okay that I stop.
Yeah.
Even if it's 10 seconds and take in the sunset.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's more of a posture toward the world. I do think, I don't know if everyone has, everyone in our culture has at least the temptation towards the time anxiety you're talking about. I mean, there are people I can be, I'm going to be upset at a person in front of me who's slowing me down on the road, even though I know I'm going to be 15 minutes early. And I'm, like there's no actual reason why I have to drive this fast, but I want to drive that fast. And that's a way we can move through life and miss things. And that whole, I think what we're saying is a lot of things in our culture will push us towards just being doers of stuff. And, basically we become high functioning sleepwalkers, or we engage in cultural interaction that doesn't, that may not lead us to beauty, meaning, whatever. It might just be straight distraction. And I don't think that's necessarily bad to watch a movie just as it's a fun distraction. It's frivolous, but you could also watch, a cable news show religiously in a way that's not giving you any of those things, but it's feeding some part of you that's not probably healthy to be fed, and you're not getting any of those. You're not getting anything done, and you're not experiencing. Right. So that's the danger. Is, do I think about my cultural interaction in a way that sort of feeds the image bearing part of me, whether it's by reading, by participating in, or by creating, and if not, I probably need to find some discipline to do
Yeah.
that, because I
Yeah.
probably won't.
Yeah,
on
I
my
think
own.
right. And I think one of my things, like an indicator of sleepwalking for me, where maybe I'm being less intentional or less disciplined, is I can rewatch things. And I'm not even sure there's anything really wrong with that. So this is just speaking for me. But if I'm rewatching the same sitcom, for maybe the sixth time through, when I have this other list that I've created intentionally of all these, art films or great literature, great,
Mhm.
movies, wherever it is I want to watch, but I've decided to sort of check out and rewatch the same thing over and over. That's like an indicator of for me that I'm sleepwalking to some degree. I've lacked
Right.
the
Yeah.
intentionality to like wake up and appreciate something that is new
Yeah.
and
Right.
creative.
Yeah. Now, one of the, I mean, I do think there's giving yourself permission to veg out here or there is
Mhm.
fine, but at some point, as you're saying, then it's more than that, and it becomes a pattern. And
Yeah,
it's not
and that's
right.
so easy for me. I can do
Sure.
it a lot.
Yeah. Well, one of the I guess one of the outflows of this whole thing, as it relates to culture and our interaction in it, and particularly as people of faith, is I think there are lots of times where people of faith are uneasy about culture, and sometimes we call it the culture, and which almost feels like shorthand for the big bad culture or the enemy culture or the threatening
Mhm.
culture or whatever. And not to say that there are cultural interactions that can be harmful to us. I mean, you kind of just described one, and
Mhm.
obviously there's other ones that become patterns that are destructive or unhealthy. I'm thinking about a future newsletter on war. What are our thoughts on war? Because there's a war now in Europe,
Mhm.
and I read an observation that the reason I guess wartime or violent video games and porn are both uh, heavy distractions of many men, they're not even young men, but men in America or in the West, is because we sort of we sort of, instead of a real war, we're fighting a fake one. Instead of real
Mhm.
relationships, we're in fake relationships. It's sort of a
Mhm.
safe retreat into a pretend world, and that's
Yeah.
obviously a destructive interaction with culture. Um,
Yeah.
but at the same time, there's lots of beauty and meaning and thought-provoking interaction that comes from culture that doesn't have to be pre-approved as agreeing with everything I agree with. That as a person
Right.
of faith, I don't have to make sure this other person has the same faith background or a similar one
Yeah.
in order to and we're talking about Station 11, which I don't really know uh you know the author's uh faith background.
Mhm.
I don't believe it's the same as mine, and yet there's lots of things in her piece of art that make me think about, make me reflect on my faith, and so on.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that in our people of faith, people who have maybe grew up with an uneasy
Yeah.
relationship with the culture?
Yeah, I feel that. I think music. I listen to music constantly. Like I have to sometimes tell myself to turn my jams off, as my kids call them, turn our
Mm-hmm.
jams off, so I can like just sit quietly. But I remember like growing up in the church, I would think if I was listening to a secular song, or maybe in the middle, somewhere between Christian and secular, it would make me uneasy to the point where I'd be like, oh, well, this is a sort of Christian lyric. Maybe they're Christians. And I'd like kind of cling to this hope that this
Mm-hmm.
band is
That made it okay.
Christians. Same with reading or watching a movie. And as I've gotten older and conversations with you and with other people, it's like as image bearers, we're all image bearers, the Christian and non-Christian. We all bear the image of God. So Christian and secular music alike can both speak to beauty and truths of God. And that's been such a good thing for me because it sort of gets rid of that uneasy feeling. Even as a creator of poetry, I've wrestled with, do I have to write explicitly Christian poems? Do they have to all say Jesus or God, or they all have to, speak about like the big truths that we would say? Or can it just be a poem about, sorry, or can it just be a poem about a tree that's beautiful, or a sunset or whatever? Like,
Right.
can it just be something that speaks of beauty? And I think it can be.
Yeah. Yeah. Or speaks of beauty, or speaks of grief, or speaks of,
Yeah.
pain. It doesn't have to be happy or beautiful,
Right.
according to some standard, because that's one of my beliefs, that will come through over and over in these podcasts and in the newsletter is, that we are fallen image bearers. So I
Mhm.
have, it doesn't even if I have the right beliefs or whatever, I have the ability to lead you astray, uh, or be destructive to you in some way, because I'm fallen. I'm not as I should be, but
Mhm.
I'm also an image bearer. And so I have the
Yeah.
ability to say something true about the world that helps you, or, and
Yeah.
that's true of everyone and everyone's belief system, that we almost have to, interact with the culture sort of on its own, you know, ground, and say, okay, an image bearer
Right.
created this culture. Is there something that is there for me to admire? Is there something there for me to learn from? Is there something there for me to engage with or to think
Yeah.
about?
Yeah. Is this something that can help me? Like you said, like I've written a lot of poetry about grief, and I've read a lot of poetry about grief because it's just helped me in my own grieving process, whether it's Christian or not. Grief is something we all experience, and it has helped me
Yeah.
as I've
Just,
processed.
yeah, to say something true about the common human experience is
Yeah.
to bear the image of God well, as
Hmm.
in the terminology we're using. And so that's where, and I think that's the sort of art, the sort of stories that I'm drawn to, whether it's fiction or whether it's a movie, that it
Hmm.
says something true about the world, about the life I'm living, in a way that causes me to think about it in a fresh way. I don't
Yeah.
know. And so I think it gives permission to interact with all sorts of culture.
Yeah.
And there's shows out there. There's lots of shows out there that many people have watched that I look at. That's not really what I want, or that I don't think that's going to be super helpful for me, or that I might even be. I mean, may react negatively to that. So I
Hmm.
don't choose to interact with that. And everyone has to sort of make their own decision. So I'm not saying just dive into all culture equally. But
Yeah.
we have a lot to learn from fellow image bearers, even if we disagree on a bunch of other stuff.
Right. Yeah. Like I'm, this about me. I'm drawn to coming of age stories or poetry that's like hey, wake up. Because as I shared earlier, I'm prone to sleepwalking. So,
Hmm.
Secret Life of Walter Mitty
Hmm.
is one of my favorite movies because it's a guy who lives, sort of in a dreamland where everything in his mind is better than everything in his real life. And then he sort of gets this invitation from the world to wake up. And I feel like that. I mean, I see myself in that movie because I feel like God doesn't want me to sleepwalk.
Yeah, that's right.
Like I wasn't created to just like exist quietly on the sidelines and not
Yeah,
participate
yeah.
in
So
life.
that's a great
Yeah.
example. It's not a movie that comes from a faith perspective or a Christian perspective or anything, but it
Right.
has something true to say to us. I mean, I
Yeah.
will maybe close with this example. It's an example I've used, before, but it hit me pretty squarely. I was watching this little movie called "Leave No Trace" about Ben Foster and her name's Tomlinson. I can't remember her name, the
Yeah.
young girl. But it's a father and a daughter. He has his issues. His issues, they're dealing with them together, and at first it's sort of sweet,
Mhm.
but then at some point she has to move away from her, that life, and live her own life. And she says, what's wrong with you isn't wrong with me. And
Yeah.
there's something universally true that every parent needs to hear, that what's wrong with
Mhm.
me as a parent isn't wrong with them. They're going to have their own issues, And I am going to inflict them with what's wrong with me at some level, and I need to help them move away from that. And that's a universally true statement, something true about the world in which we live. And so it's a beautiful part of culture that isn't, again, from a faith perspective. And it's, experiencing that creative storytelling is, I think, what we're meant to be doing as we are interacting with culture. So let me just end it there. We're to the end of our time. So thanks for being with us, and this thanks, Kyle. Thanks for being with us in this latest On Culture episode. And you can, again, find us anywhere you look for podcasts. So we should be there. And don't forget to check out the Embassy newsletter at theembassy.substack.com. Bye, y'all. Have a great one.
Thanks for listening. Do you enjoy On Culture? You can support us and the content produced by subscribing to our newsletter, The Embassy, by visiting theembassy.substack.com. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts.